All right, guys, so today we are back with another plasticine tutorial. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. Today we're going to do a little bit of sculpting from life, or from at least a real life picture. So in this tutorial, what we're going to do is we're going to do almost like a still life drawing where you have an object in front of you and you have to draw it. We're going to do the same thing, but sculpting it out of clay. And we're going to use a pretty easy subject that lends itself well to this because it has some nice kind of flow and organic curves to it. But I have my computer here, and this is going to be my reference. And so what I am going to be doing is I'm going to be sculpting a bone. So this bone here is the one that I'm looking at. I have it pulled up on my computer. So that I can have a nice reference to work from. This is what I recommend you guys doing. And I did just a search for, if you can see that, animal bone. And I found all kinds of really neat, kind of interesting shapes here. Now, you know, you can sculpt really any kind of bone that you like. But I just did this, and if you do an animal bone, then chances are you'll find kind of some different shapes and some different neat sort of things to look at. So this is what I'm going to be working from. I have it here set up right next to me, and I'm going to be referencing that as I work. Now, there's a little bit of prep involved here. So what I did is I just, you know, with a knife, I just grabbed like a kitchen knife. I cut off a nice chunk of my plasticine. However, that leaves you kind of with like this rectangular shape, and it's really maybe not quite long enough for what I want to do. Maybe it would be fine, you know, for whatever you're working with. But so what I did is I started working it and just kind of stretching this out. Now remember, this isn't like normal clay where we can just take it and we can just sort of flatten it and roll it out. Plasticine's a little bit different. Maybe you can roll it a little bit like this, like if you were rolling out a coil. But what happens is it tends to start cracking apart, and we don't want that. So I think the best way to do this is just to start kind of very slowly spreading the clay out. And what you can also do, what I did here a little bit too, is I took little scraps of clay and I just started to push those little scraps of clay onto this chunk to start getting the basic shape of what I want. So this is going to be a lot more of a carving exercise than anything else. But the idea here is that we want to make this look as realistic as possible. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with something that's kind of like the basic shape. So I can imagine that like that bone is maybe lodged in here. And I'm just going to start carving away the stuff until I get to that bone. So what I would do is I would take my little carving tool here. And I'm going to just start to remove some of this stuff. Now, if you get to areas where it's maybe a little bit hollowed out, you can just sort of push this stuff all together. And so what I have with this particular object is it gets kind of thinner down along the middle, and then on either end where that joint would be for the bone, we have a little bit more shape and substance. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start carving around the outside edge to thin out that middle piece. And look carefully, you don't want to do too much at once because then it starts to crack. And if that happens, you're just going to smooth this together and just kind of piece your clay back together. And that's fine. That may happen. Now you can kind of exaggerate these shapes too. They don't have to be exact replicas. As long as it's kind of bone-like, I suppose. We are using this for a reference. And then I'm just gonna keep carving away and carving away until I kind of get that basic shape of what I want. Again, if you take too much away at once, you do run the risk of cracking this stuff, so be careful. And I have stuff that just doesn't want to stay together down here at the bottom. So I'm just going to keep working this clay back and forth until it's kind of all stuck together. It's already starting to look a little bit, you know, like a chicken leg. But this is going to be a process. So, you know, it's not going to happen immediately. It's like any time you do like a drawing or a painting, there's a process to get to where you want. But this is a nice project for this material because we can get these kind of very realistic looking features in this. And you're gonna end up with something that like actually legitimately looks like it could be some sort of, you know, animal bone or something. And you can get this just by even leaving some of these textures. I think prior to this, we've done a lot of smoothing. But with this particular project, you can leave some of these textures in place and they're gonna create that kind of more organic looking texture that you might find in some sort of animal bone. Now it's up to you how complex of a bone you want to choose for this. You know, I chose something that was relatively simple, primarily because I didn't want to take forever on this tutorial, because I'd rather you guys just kind of get to work instead of sitting here forever and watching this. But you guys can make these as complex as you want. So the important thing here is that you just kind of really look at the image you're working from and really try to replicate a lot of those different little shapes that you see in there. And so I'm using a combination here really of carving and just kind of shaping things with my hands. And I have this one little section down here that just really doesn't want to stay together. So I'm gonna just keep kind of squeezing those pieces together. And I know this might not be the most exciting sculpture in the world, because when you're done with it, it's not gonna really necessarily look like very much. It's gonna look like, you know, a bone. But that's okay, because we're learning some important things along the way, primarily how to replicate a natural object out of clay. And so it's just kind of like still life drawing. If you've ever done a still life drawing where you set up like some objects in front of you and then just try to draw those objects, it's not the most entertaining or fun drawing that you'll ever do, but it teaches you a lot of important things about drawing, like shading and shadow. And so this, even though it's not the most fun sculpture in the world, it's teaching you how to emulate a natural object, you know, out of the material that you're working with. In this instance, it is plasticine. Oh my goodness, this little part down here, two ends here just don't like each other. They just keep breaking apart, but I'll just keep on putting them back together. And you can see that I'm just very gradually turning this lump of clay into this animal bone. And as I go, it does start to look more and more like an animal bone. And so we want to get to the point where, you know, you could take a picture of this and you would kind of be hard-pressed to tell the difference whether it was a piece of clay or whether it was an actual bone. So, you know, when you guys take these pictures and upload them, it should be like a little bit difficult to tell whether this is a made object or whether it's actually like, you know, a bone from the chicken wings you had from dinner. So we're at about 10 minutes here. And so it took me only 10 minutes to get like this far. And I'm well on my way here. I have my basic structure down. And now at this point in time, it would just be a matter of going in and doing a little bit more carving, maybe removing some sections here and there, adding some textures, and definitely fine-tuning these end parts and kind of working on the little nuances and curves and bumps that we see on each ends of these bones. Which, you know, I'm not going to do all that stuff right now because you guys don't need to sit here and watch me do this for 20 more minutes. But, you know, this is the basic, this is the process, this is the start, and this is already starting to look like, you know, some sort of animal bone, and that's good. So the whole idea here is that we have an image, we're working from that image, and we are trying to get this to look as much like that image as possible. So we're just trying to replicate what we see. And even though, you know, like I said, it's not the most fun, entertaining object here, what it's going to do is it's going to start to really get you guys thinking about how to emulate a natural object. And that's kind of the goal here, is that just like a still life drawing, where we're trying to draw this natural object and get it to look like that object, we're doing the same thing here with our clay. All right, so that's kind of the start of the process. From here, we're just gonna keep on working and keep on developing this. And hopefully by the time you're done, you have something that looks just like the reference picture that you are working from. All right, so thank you guys. Hopefully this was a little bit helpful, and I will see you next time.